Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 27, and we are going to talk about freedom because it should be July 4th. Well, it's for July 4th. I don't know if anyone or when anyone might listen to this. And at this point, I think my kids will eventually listen to this one day, or at least their kids, maybe. A long time ago, when I was younger, I watched a movie called Braveheart, and I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but it's about the Scottish Rebellion led by William Wallace back in the day, way back in the day. And there was a climactic scene where William Wallace just yells out, "Freedom!" And I thought, wow, man, yeah, freedom, that's what it's about. And I came out of the theater and I was like, yeah, freedom. But then I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute. So he wanted freedom from English tyranny so that the Scots could be ruled by corrupt Scottish nobles. So freedom to choose who will oppress you. Luckily, we have better choices today. And especially here in America, uh, there's a history of freedom. Now, a lot of people are afraid of freedom today, but back in the day, because freedom was such a strong assumption for people growing up in the United States, I think that contributed to the world disliking American tourists when they came into town. And I know that personally, when I went to Asia, probably a lot of people found me very difficult to tolerate, but they being so polite, they tolerated me. But people, as I said, they've come to fear freedom. And I think it's because a lot of people who fear this concept of freedom, it's because they think about all of the things that they would do with that kind of unrestrained, unrestricted freedom, and then they project it, those feelings, those thoughts, to other people. I don't even think that other people would do many things, but because they're imagining it, they fear that other people would actually make those choices and create lots of problematic situations for other people. I think this happens a lot for many different issues where people just simply project bad behavior onto others. And it's in reality, it's the bad behavior they want to do secretly, but they suppress it, right? They try not to reveal that. But in America, for various reasons that I've already gone over, many Americans have squandered this freedom with fake morality, right? So some people think that certain choices, certain actions, certain phenomena are morally right. But we have to remember that value is always subjective, the subjective theory of value. And I'm pretty sure I brought it up before, but it basically means that depending on who you are, what is more valuable than something else is a matter of perspective, an opinion. So, sure, we can recognize that certain behaviors, certain traits, certain ideas are valuable, but is it more valuable than other things? For example, climate change. Okay, sure, it's kind of an important topic, but if I had to choose between supporting climate change uh, legislation or making sure that my kids have enough food to eat, yeah, climate change takes a uh, backseat to that kind of issue. And so, because value is subjective, it affects people's priorities. A lot of people, though, they try to deny this idea of subjectivity when it comes to certain ideas. It's absolutely important. So, everyone has to recognize its importance. And so, they legislate that everyone must uh, elevate this activity, this idea to the top of the list, and therefore it now has priority. Even it becomes more important than feeding your own children. That is essentially what our society has degenerated to being. So instead of thinking that value is subjective, some people like to think that value is absolute. In other words, it doesn't change. The value doesn't change. It's always important. And if you don't think it's important, then it's because you have a knowledge problem, right? Your perspective is bad. You have misinformation. You were mistaught, which is why you don't agree with all of these other people who are clearly correct in all of their thinking, even though they know nothing about your life, your situation, your circumstance. It doesn't matter, right? Because why would feeding your children be something that a parent should worry about? I'm being sarcastic, but anyway, moving on. I remember when I was a lot younger, in school, we would debate things like, should America be the policeman of the world? I don't know if people still talk about that kind of thing, but I remember that it came up more than once, and I thought it was a very boring topic to discuss. But I thought about it, and I said, well, if you if you do have the power to prevent problems, right, to resolve problems in other countries, then shouldn't you have it? Shouldn't you do it? Shouldn't Americans and the country America try to bring an end to conflict and trouble in other countries? It seemed like a kind of um, the right thing to do. Um, However, if you think about it, really what the debate was really saying, should the United States deny other countries the freedom to act? That essentially is what the debate is about. And you can go into morality or not. However, if we don't understand the history, we don't know who the actors are, we don't know the political agenda behind the rhetoric, the propaganda, the information that we're being fed. If you go back and listen to the episode that I made for Memorial Day, I talk about Thucydides and how a lot of people will just simply present one side of a conflict to persuade people to start a war. I also brought up other authors who discussed how war is a racket, and how the first casualty of war is the truth. But we forget all of these lessons and we say, should America be the policeman of the world? Also, we should remember that many Americans, if not most of them, cannot even find Washington, D.C. on a map. So, what business do they have having an opinion on what other countries and other people in other countries should do, right? They should figure it out themselves. Nevertheless, people believe that freedom is just simply too dangerous. And so government must limit and restrict people's freedom so that they would focus on the real important issues, right? Like healthcare and drugs. We have to remember that value, even if someone declares that healthcare is the most important issue of the day, and it can be any other issue, but let's just say healthcare is the most important issue of the day, one must realize that none of the other problems, even if you agree, right, all of the other priorities, all of the other urgent choices that need to be made, they don't just disappear. They're still there. And if you have shifted the priorities because someone else is forcing you to, then problems can be much worse. We saw this over the last few years because the threat of cervezas that's Spanish for beer. We, I hope you get it. But anyway, there was this big disease running around, and I'll call it cervezas. And people said, well, that is the priority. And it doesn't matter if you have cancer, you were going to go in for an operation, that if you delay it, you're probably going to die. No, no one thought about any of those issues, right? And so many people died because they couldn't receive the health treatment that they were supposed to, because cervesis was the new priority. And that's kind of what I mean. When you say that people cannot be trusted with freedom, you're saying that their priorities suck, right? So they shouldn't have freedom to make the choices because you, who know nothing about other people or even yourself, you're going to tell them what is important, what is not. But why be afraid of freedom? With great freedom comes great responsibility. Okay, it's a little twist there. But the limit or the restriction of freedom is always responsibility or liability. Even though you have freedom of choice, you have to take responsibility for all of the consequences. And that is what restrains people, not the government, right? The government tries to restrain, and all we get is a black market, right? So for us, what we have to realize is that what restrains us, what prevents us from doing dangerous things, harmful things, things which pollute other people's property, is liability. If we are able and willing and have full knowledge of what the consequences may be, could be, and you're willing to take responsibility for all of those consequences, then make the choice. Okay. But if you can't do the time, don't do the crime, as we used to say. If you think that the punishment is too steep, then make a different choice, right? So many simple choices could have, or simple mistakes could have been avoided if one did some simple research, right? So we already talked about the submersible that went to look at the Titanic. If the company just examined what other people had done when it comes to constructing deep sea, deep water submersibles, they would realize that the materials they were using were flawed, right? There was a serious problem with using those materials. But even with a lot of planning, and you're thinking about all the worst case scenarios, like the worst possible thing that could happen, there's always an unexpected event, something you never thought of, and you only realize that that was a possibility after the fact. So what you do is, what most people have historically done is take out insurance. And the insurance company, the great thing about, and insurance companies get a lot of shade, they get a lot of criticism because of the propaganda of the government and news agencies. But the great thing about insurance companies is that they don't want to pay out. And you might say, well, that's a bad thing. No, it's a good thing, because what they're going to do is they're going to tell you what you need to consider uh, as you get your insurance. In other words, having insurance doesn't mean it's a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean that now you're Superman. It doesn't mean that at all. What it does say is, okay, we will cover damages if, right, certain things are in place. And so if you have no safety features in place, your premium is going to be either really, really high, or they won't even insure you. But you need insurance, right? Because there's too much at risk. So you go to the insurance company, you say, well, what do I need to do to get insurance and to bring the premium, the cost that I have to pay for the insurance? How can I bring it down? And they tell you what you need to do to reduce your risk, right? And so one of the buildings that I am responsible for, I had the fire inspector come in, and he said, oh, you got to put in smoke detectors here, you have to put a panic bar here. He gave me all these things that I needed to do, which cost a certain amount of money. But by doing it, an insurance company agreed to cover the building. Without doing that, the insurance company would not have agreed to cover the building, because there are too many things that could go wrong. A lot of people say, well, once you get insurance, then that's fine. But what people don't know, and especially people who are not property owners and who never had to deal with issues like this, they don't realize that if you file a claim, right? So something goes wrong, like there's a fire, and so you tell the insurance company, hey, we had a fire, so can you cover the damages? So you submit a claim, but the problem is your premium goes way up. So when the BLM riots, the Black Lives Matter riots took place, I heard a lot of people say that it's okay to burn down those businesses because they have insurance. I knew of one family, they did not have insurance, because fire insurance is generally kind of pricey, but they took a risk and they didn't have fire insurance, and so they weren't covered. But other businesses that have fire insurance, if they do get a payout, right, uh, it is likely that they will not be able to have the building insured again, because riots happen in that neighborhood now. and there's a high probability that it'll get burned down again, which means the insurance company will be out a lot of money, and so they will refuse to cover you again. So you won't, because you don't have fire insurance, then your business is no more. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so essentially by burning down a business, you destroy that business. Um, so there are consequences of choices and actions in business. If I sell something that's toxic, people die or they go to the hospital, then I become liable, right? I am responsible because I sold it. And so therefore, what I'm going to do is, because I don't want people to be hurt, I test the products myself, right? I don't wait for the government to start a consumer protection agency to test all these products at an exorbitant cost. No, I am going to look for the best testing agency to do it cost effectively, quickly, so that I'm not sued every single day. There's a drug testing service that, well, if you wanted to get a drug tested and approved by the FDA here in the United States, it costs $4 billion. Well, this is pre-corona, pre-Cervasis prices, right? But it was 10 years. It took 10 years and $4 billion. There is a drug company who does it for free in 2 weeks, right? And it's like, why does the FDA take 10 years? It's because they are more interested in protecting the interests of the insurance company, right? And because it's a semi-monopoly situation going on there. It doesn't matter how much it is, how long it takes, because it means that there can be no new competitors here in the United States. And so small-time competitors who have this really fantastic drug, they don't have $4 billion in 10 years to get their drug approved, and so it never gets off the ground. And so you realize that government claiming to protect us from bad business practices are actually protecting those businesses. And then, even worse, you saw in the last couple of years the government giving exemptions from liability to certain companies so that they never have to be responsible for the negative outcomes of the products that they're selling and forcing into the bodies of certain people. But keep in mind, too, the same dynamic exists in parenting. There are consequences in the choices of parenting, in the way you have human relationships, not only with neighbors, but with friends. Um, and the consequences is that one day you might need their help. And if you treated them badly, who's there? Who's going to help you? And especially if the government doesn't have any kind of safety net programs, then you have to be more careful in how you raise your family, how you conduct your relationships with other people. In other words, you become more polite, you become more compassionate, empathetic. There are consequences in governing as well. And if you govern badly, everyone is going to try to escape your country. If you govern well, everyone is going to try to come into your country to work hard and contribute to society. Some people fail. With all this freedom, some people may fail. Yes, that is unfortunate. But we as a society, we never remember anyone who has failed, basically. But at the same time, there are some people who succeed fantastically. They create wonderful things because of the freedom that they had. Having more freedom allows us to explore ways to defeat and combat and push back against discrimination, bad discrimination, unproductive discrimination, bad laws even. And so the more freedom that we have, the more creative people will become, the faster that problems will be solved, and life would be better and more prosperous in that way. So just remember, there's nothing to fear when it comes to freedom. Rather, there is much more positive than negative, especially if you have a society that does not allow certain people to escape their responsibility, their liability, but that if all of us are aware of the consequences of our choices, we would be much, much more careful with the choices that we make. Uh, Hope you have a great 4th of July. I'll see you in the next episode.